And thank you very much for making the choice to come into this session. I'm Sharon Doughty and I'm President of the Kids Task Force, and over the next hour and a half we're going to hopefully tell you more about what the Kids Task Force does, and you'll also be hearing from some people much more interesting than me, Paul Elliott, who played for England, Celtic, Charlton, Chelsea, for many of our most prestigious football teams, and also from Duncan Taylor, who is a head teacher who has been seconded through the Association of Chief Police Officers to work with us. And I'm sure people are going to be coming in as we start, but I thought if we make a start, because we've got quite a lot of things that we'd like to show you, so I hope you don't mind people filing in as we begin. So the Kids Task Force is what we call a partnership through desire, because I'm sure many of you are familiar with partnership working, and it's become kind of one of those things that's said, and sometimes I think people feel that it's a burden. But the Kids Task Force is about people working together because they want to make the lives of children safer. So I am also a television presenter, so there's going to be lots and lots of film in here, because it's easy for me to do, and that's what I do most naturally. So I'm going to start by playing a film, which is you hearing from the children and some of our partners about what the Kids Task Force is as an education programme. If we could play that film, please.
The bit I like is the one with the crosswords and the word searches.
I think Miss Dorothy is a good book because it helps kids to understand things.
It's a good way to talk about when you feel safe and when you don't.
I think it's a great programme, great early intervention with the partners, with Harrow Council, the Met Police, the Fire Brigade. I just think it's a really good project with engaging with young people.
I learned there are some people that can convince you, really convince you to take drugs, but then they know it's bad themselves.
There is no better or bigger or more important agenda than helping our young kids to flourish and become a good contributors to society, and it's great to be a part of it, so thank you for that.
It actually helps for your later in life because it teaches you the dangers of, the real world.
We've seen the work that Kids Task Force does and we're very impressed with it. It's about making children feel safe.
This is a very professional programme that we're very keen to support. It's not often that we engage with partnerships that are so well run. This one is top notch.
I was just going to say a very big thank you, really. I mean, because we've been lucky enough to be able to run two programmes, not just Miss Dorothy, but also the Watch Over Me, because we were middle school. And the difference that it's made this year has been enormous, so thank you very much.
The ethos behind the Miss Dorothy programme, which was about empowering children to deal with risk and develop strategies to deal with risk, was something that the PFA was fully behind and fully wanted to endorse.
So the Kids Task Force is a partnership between the police, the fire service, the football world and education, and the third sector, which is our charity. And I'm going to tell you more about the learning programme, which is about helping children learn how to manage risk and how to lead safer lives as we go on. But I thought that it would be important for you to understand how we've come to the point where the learning programme has been endorsed by the Secretary of State. I'm particularly proud that the learning programme has been endorsed by the DCSF, because 5 years ago when we started this, I was told in no uncertain terms by civil servants at the DFES that we would never have that endorsement, because third-party resources are never endorsed by the department. So I'm going to take you now on our journey and through our history to explain to you how we've reached this point. And one of the things in partnership that's also very important, in the centre of that photograph with the ministers is Simon Marshall, who's the Operations Director of Reliance Secure Task Management, and they are the sponsors of the Kids Task Force. And the reason that I mention them, because almost sometimes you get fed up with people plugging their sponsors, but it's very, very important to find the right sponsor if you're an organisation. And Reliance actually, in the words of one of my newsreader friends when he was speaking at one of our events, bang up prisoners for their daytime job. And you might think that's interesting, why are they involved with us? And the reason they're involved with us is because they wanted their staff to have the opportunity to do something that they felt was putting something back and possibly preventing young people from going into the criminal justice system. So they've become our sponsors for very much, we believe, the right reasons, and they work in partnership with us and they help us with all our events. So why am I standing here? As a journalist, you might think, well, why is this journalist actually running an education programme? And the reason I'm standing here is because I nearly died in a car crash about 8 years ago on my way to the BBC to read the news, and it really made me reevaluate my life, because strangely enough, when I was trapped in the car, I didn't think, damn, I hadn't read news at 10. I actually thought that I wanted to do something that would make a difference. And as I recovered from the accident, around that time, Sir John Stevens was the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and he asked me to start training community safety officers about the impact of violence on children. And the reason that he did that is that I was a crime reporter in London, and I was on television a lot over a period of about 18 years. But I knew John very well, and he also knew about my background. And I'm going to share my childhood story with you, because I think in your jobs, if you are doing things that are relating to children, it's really important that you understand my motivation. And basically, my father was very violent. So between the ages of 2.5 and 7, I witnessed extreme violence in my home. And my earliest memory of the violence was when I was 2.5, when my mum came home carrying me in her arms, and as we came through the door, my father punched her in the face. And I can still remember the sound of the blood hitting the wall. And the reason that I tell you that is because television sanitises violence, but for children, they have to live with it all of the time. And it's something that they can't escape from, and it impacts on their ability to learn and their ability to develop. And basically, I was unable to read. I was in what they called a remedial reading class at school because of the violence at home. And my mum tried to protect me from the violence if she thought that it was going to happen, and left me with my father's parents, having no idea that my grandfather was a paedophile, because domestic violence and child abuse are very often linked. So at 7, when my mum found the considerable courage to escape from the situation, I was unable to read and I couldn't tell the time, and nobody really knew what was wrong with me. But in the 6 weeks of my mum leaving and us going to live with my other grandparents and my mum being safe, I managed to start to read, and it was as if everything just all fell into place, because children who aren't safe find it very difficult to learn. And that's why I'm sharing this with you, because the Miss Dorothy Learning Programme, the Watch Over Me Learning Programme for teenagers, and the Kids Task Force is not a product. It's about real life experiences of people and putting those real life experiences into a learning programme that can really help children. I also work with my husband. He's been very supportive of everything that we do. He was a Metropolitan Police officer and also witnessed a great deal of violence and situations that children are in. And when Neil retired from the police, we opened a homeless hostel, a place for vulnerable families to live, which I can tell you was another huge learning curve. And I think one of the most shocking things for us was actually seeing the amount of children that were in emergency accommodation. And the amount of women that actually give birth and come back with newborn babies in emergency hostels. But what we saw in there, because I wanted and Neil wanted to do something that made a difference, but what we realised was that this was just a sticking plaster, because these families were like in a revolving door. Their families had been in emergency and council accommodation. And what we realised is that there's a small window of opportunity in school where you can actually reach children and change the way they think. Because those people in there weren't being bad parents. If you're 16 and you've got two children by two different fathers at that point and you were never parented, how are you able to be a good parent? How do you know what good parenting is? Also, as a child, if you're in that situation, how do you know what a good role model is? You know, if your mum is an alcoholic and your dad is in prison, what do you dream of being and what do you aspire to become? And so we realised that there were many things that we could put into an education programme that could actually make a difference for children. And one of the things that we felt was key that we taught children was actually to know what it means to be safe and who is there in our community to keep us safe. And Sir John Stevens asked me to speak publicly about my experiences, to help develop training programmes for the Metropolitan Police, and also to research really what was being done nationally. And when I started to research as a journalist, because it's the only way I know how to approach anything, which is to go out and talk to people, I realised that we have no national standard of safety information in our schools, which to me as an outsider was quite shocking. Because what we have is the national curriculum and we have guidelines, but we have the police and the fire service actually competing for classroom time to talk to children about issues that are about saving their lives. And no coordination whatsoever at national level. And so I decided to start a charity which would start to put some of that right and that would raise awareness of this. And I was very shocked to find that Nelson Mandela was one of the first people that wanted to work with us, and the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund worked in partnership with us to raise awareness of the safety of children in South Africa, and particularly disabled children. And as you can imagine, with that person as the first person to endorse my ideas, things started to fly. So it was quite shocking. And also when, as my colleagues at ITN and the BBC, because I actually worked at Channel 4, ITN, BBC and Sky, and when I started to talk about my personal experiences, they were very shocked, and many of them felt that they'd let me down, although I have no idea how they could have done that because they didn't know what had happened to me. But they decided that they really wanted to do something to help me raise the awareness. So this is Trevor at Anti-Bullying Week, helping us at a photo shoot in the News at 10 studio. And we also, with the resources that we created, I was told that they wouldn't be able to reach the hardest to reach children in terms of pupil referral units. So we actually did a programme with the children in the pupil referral units. And at the end, I suppose, of me chatting about Trevor and all the different people I knew, they said that they wanted Trevor MacDonald to launch it. So they came to Scotland Yard and he launched it for them. Nicholas Owen also has been a long-term supporter and hosts all our events, and this is us recording some work for children in the News at 10 studio. And there's Nicholas with Ministers and Julie Etchingham, who's the current News at 10 reader with the then Home Secretary and Police Minister. So, what is Miss Dorothy Com? Who is .com? Basically, she is a friend to children. She's the friend that I would have wanted when the things were happening to me when I was a child. And I was researching a documentary for Channel 4 with Roger Mills, who directs the Palin series Around the World in 80 Days. And I started saying to him, you know, Roger, we really need someone who can be a friend to children. And we were researching an internet documentary, and he said, well, Shaz, I'd like to meet .com. And we all sort of fell about laughing. And then I thought, oh, hang on a minute, MissDorothyCom.com, she could be a friend to children. And also I was working with ministers, and they were talking about it was really important to have girls into IT and good female role models. And so I realised that we could create this character that would be able to be a friend to children, but would also achieve the political agenda. And then what we did was create friends for Dot that she went to school with. And some of the characters you see there look like stereotypes, but the idea is we get children to see beyond what they're presented with. So, for example, the black boy with the basketball and the girl next to him are brother and sister, and actually Slam's too short to play basketball and he's really academic, but he loves it and he wants to grow tall enough to be slam dunk and change the world in basketball. But he's never really going to do that because actually he's an academic. So it's about helping children to see the characters for who they are and helping them to develop the skills that they really have. Also, I went to the presidents of ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers and Chief Fire Officers, and I said to them, you know, if you go and talk to the civil servants at the PSHE department, Personal Social Health Education, they've got a list this long of organisations that think it's absolutely critical that they get curriculum time. And you are competing with people who want to teach children how to eat with a knife and fork. At the same time, you want to teach them how to cross the road and save their lives. Something's wrong here. So we need to look at what is your agenda, what are some of your issues. Then look at the fire service, what are some of your issues? And when you start to look at them, the issues are the same. So the police call it roads policing, the fire service call it road safety. It's exactly the same thing if you're a child. So we need to start looking at where are the crossovers and how do we bring things together. And then it was the children themselves that asked for the involvement of football. We were doing a launch at Manchester Town Hall with 200 children, And I said, oh, you really seem to like the resources and it all seemed to be going very well. And I said, you know, is there anything that could make it better? And 200 faces just looked at me like, football, silly woman. So I realised that that's definitely what we needed to include. And the thing that is really critical about the involvement of football is that they are role models for children, and the badge means so much to the children. So if the footballers, the football in the community coaches, the police officers and the firefighters coming into the room have a sustained message for the children, are saying the same thing. If the football coach, the police officer are saying don't bully, then that means something to the children. As I'm sure many of you are parents, and it's no good if you all say different things to the children. So a joined up approach from all of the adults that come into the classroom is absolutely critical. Also, what was important is that lots and lots of money, I thought, was being wasted on packs being produced by the police, by the fire service, literally, one of them was £50,000. They hadn't even spoken to a teacher. They just decided that they knew what the fire messages were, so that needed to be produced. So when you talk to teachers, they're there to deliver the national curriculum. So actually, you have to have resources that meet the national curriculum, that in fact meet the self-evaluation form section 4, which is the Ofsted criteria, so that if they use our materials, they can say to Ofsted, we have real evidence that we are keeping children safe. So actually, what we've done is work towards making all of the targets for the police, the fire service, and everybody be met by the materials, so that we can get the materials to the children. And what we have is a workbook for every year of primary school. And the reason some teachers say, oh, I don't like workbooks, they make teachers lazy. But these are not workbooks, these are special journals for the child to keep, because for many children whose learning is affected by violence or by danger, they will not be able to write properly, and they won't, some of them, be able to read. So actually, this workbook is a place in which they can write or draw, where they can record their feelings, and it is basically a communication tool. It's a way that the child can communicate. Because if you grew up in a house like I did, how are you able to walk up to a teacher and say, every time I go and see my granddad, this is what happens? How do you have the vocabulary to be able to do that? And so in these workbooks, we teach children how to communicate, emotional vocabulary, what it means to be safe, who are the people there in the community to keep them safe, and who can actually help them when things go wrong, and actually also teach them self-confidence. Because if you grow up in a house where nobody ever talks to you, nobody ever asks you if you're okay, then you won't think that you're important. If you don't think you're important, you won't think that you deserve to be helped. So these are all of the issues that we address in the workbooks. We were very lucky that our work attracted the attention of the then Prime Minister, who was Tony Blair. And one of the things we brought to the attention of the Prime Minister's team at the time is that if the government's Every Child Matters agenda matters, then every child deserves the information that can keep them safe. And the only way that you can achieve that is if it's taught by the teacher and supported by the outside agencies. So I'll give you the example. When I went to see the Commissioner of London Fire Brigade and I said, would you support this? He said, but why would we? We have the best programme in the country. Where have I heard that before as I travel around? And he said, we reached 90,000 children in London last year. And I said, well, that is fantastic, and you should be proud of that record, but how did you choose the 210,000 other children that didn't deserve the information? And he'd never thought about it like that, so he was very shocked. And the only way to reach those children is if the teacher delivers it, and then the visits are the icing on the cake. The other thing that happened, which was quite shocking, is Tony Blair launched the Miss Dorothy programme, the first workbook, and I got a phone call out of the blue from the parents of Millie Dowler. I don't know if you remember Millie Dowler, who was murdered on her way home from school in Surrey. And her mother felt that very much she as a parent had let Millie down. I mean, I honestly think that you never recover from the death of a child, and you're constantly blaming yourself. And her feeling was that because when Millie was little, they talked to her about being safe, but when she was a teenager and she was at that whatever mum stage, it was really difficult to have those conversations. And then she felt that school had let her down because they hadn't talked to her about managing risk and being safe. And she asked me, could we create something that would be as innovative and exciting for children as the cartoon series for teenagers. Where I used to read the news at the BBC, they used to make EastEnders, and I used to have to drive my car out of hordes of screaming teenagers thinking Ricky was a real person, which was quite frightening. And I realised that actually you had this amazing tool if you could create a soap opera. And so that's what we did. We created a soap opera called Watch Over Me, and we addressed a number of issues. Every series of Watch Over Me is a roundup of a number of issues. And sometimes people say, well, how can you do one issue well if there's so many issues in a soap? And I'd say, well, have you ever watched a half-hour episode of EastEnders? I mean, how many episodes how many issues do you cover in half hour of EastEnders if you actually take a step back and think about it? So that's what we do, but we also make mini documentaries that go with the films, so that every issue is covered. I also am able to use my contacts to reach celebrities. So the celebrities who speak at the top of the films are, the kind of people that kids think are icons, and the messages that they give. I said to the kids when I was researching, if Ant and Dec said don't take drugs, would that still be naff? And they were like, yeah. So I said, well, what about if they told you about personal times when they were frightened, or times when things that they do to keep safe? And they said, oh yeah, that'd be really good. So that's actually what we do. We have celebrities talking about that. And we got to the point after we launched the first series of Watch Over Me where the Prime Minister and Cherie Blair became involved and helped with the fundraising. So could we just play the clip of Tony Blair, please?
It's not easy being young today, as any parent knows. There are more opportunities than ever, but also more pressures and some very tough choices. And whether it's making friends or dealing with bullying, keeping safe on the way home, or when you use the computer, or the dangers of drugs and knives and guns, it can be hard to know whether you're making the right decisions. So the more advice and support provided to help with these choices, the better it is. This is why MissDorothy.com and the latest series of Watch Over Me, supported by Chief Constables and Chief Fire Officers across the country, is such a great idea. The sensible and accessible advice provided will help young people make the right decisions and lead safer, healthier and happier lives. And that's in everyone's interest. So I wish Miss Dorothy lots of luck for the future. Well done and keep going.
Do you know how long it took me to teach him how to say MissDorothy.com? Which is why we decided to change the name overall of the charity to the Kids Task Force. It was so much easier. It made a lot of film time saved. But interestingly, it was shocking to me as a journalist to find the support of the Prime Minister was virtually of no use whatsoever. Apart from the fact it was very good to show to sponsors, it impressed people. The thing that actually made the difference to our programme was the civil service. It was the civil servants who got behind what we were doing, who were inspired by the idea of a programme that really engaged kids, talking to them in their own language. And it was them that helped me to access the funding to make the Watch Over Me series. These are £500,000 productions with different pots of money brought from different people. Louise Day, who was working with Baroness Scotland, managed in just a week to bring to the table £250,000 for the second series of Watch Over Me. And Bernard Law, who was working in the Home Office, went from desk to desk to desk, because before he said, you are right, we don't talk to each other. I'm sure if I went round the room and had a bit of a whip round, we could get some money together. And it was just fantastic. Came back with £350,000. And actually, individually, different desks had all been planning on making a film on knives or a film on guns or a film on something. And actually, they agreed to put their money into one pot. And so Series 2 and Series 3 were commissioned by a combination of the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Department for Education. There was some money from the police, there was some money from different charities. And I'd like to just play you a roundup of Watch Over Me, which we now call WOM because it's so much easier, which will just give you a taste of the broadcast quality of the material, which is very, very important. Because if you're saying to teenagers, your safety is important, you have to give them quality, because it's what they see at home. And it's certainly what the drug dealers and the other people use to get their attention. So we could play the film, please.
Can't get out
Watch Over Me is a soap opera which explores the risks and challenges that young people face in life. It's researched around the country with young people from a variety of different backgrounds, and the storylines do not go beyond the real-life experiences they faced. The soap first started in 2003 after the death of a teenager from Surrey called Millie Dowler. Millie was abducted and murdered on her way home from school, and her parents wanted to find a way of helping young people think about the dangers they might face and how they could deal with them. They approached MissDorothy.com to come up with an innovative way of discussing risk which would not be boring, and so, with the help of the National Youth Theatre of Great Britain, the soap was created. The first series tackled issues around the journey home from school.
Excuse me, love. I'm really sorry to bother you. Can you help me, do you think?
I don't know.
I've been a bit stupid, I think. I seem to have been driving around here for ages.
Street robbery, bullying and violence. The series was such a success with young people that the government commissioned another series to look at gun crime, forced marriage, domestic violence, bereavement and drugs. This series was in memory of George Atkinson, a 13-year-old boy who was shot and killed accidentally with an air rifle. Series 3 is in memory of Damilola Taylor, a young person who moved to South London and was the victim of a gang of bullies. They tried to blackmail him into handing over money and his new clothes, and he eventually lost his life when they stabbed him during one of these attacks.
I'm watching you. I'm not joking, Elfin boy. I'll stripe you. I want to carve you up.
The series looks at issues around gangs and knives and how to make communities safer for young people. We continue to follow the lives of the main characters. JD, who was the victim of domestic violence when a relationship went badly wrong, and her boyfriend Ashley turned out to be a drug dealer with a violent side. Ryan, who witnessed one of the attacks, was left facing armed police officers after confronting Ashley with a replica gun.
Look at me! Put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Asma decided to run away because her family were trying to force her into a marriage she did not want. And Craig, who was receiving help from his head teacher with reading, was last seen getting into a car with her son Danny, after Danny planted drugs on him out of jealousy.
Get in.
You can't drive. You're not old enough to drive.
I am old enough. I can drive, I just haven't got a licence.
See, just in that last clip there, that sentence, you can't drive, I can drive, I just haven't got a licence. If you're a police officer, you can take that clip, come into the classroom after the teachers use the drama and talk to the kids about the consequences of driving without a driving licence. The fire service can come in and talk to the kids about road safety, but you can use the characters and the choices that the characters make to communicate with the young people about their lives. And all of the storylines in here don't go beyond real life experience. And that is very important to the children, that they know these are real things that happen to people. And the idea is, how can someone stay safe if they were faced with this situation? How could they make the right choices? But I just wanted to share a moment with you that was really traumatic for us. We were having all of this success with Series 2, and this man was the man that made the funding available in terms of giving his support for Series 1 and Series 2. And David Blunkett said something which has always stayed with me. He said when he met Sally Dowler and he heard about our ideas, that he thought that it made him feel as if some good could come from terrible evil. Unfortunately, at the launch of Series 2 of Watch Over Me, it was the last thing David Blunkett did in his career, and he resigned, and we lost all the funding that was earmarked for us. Civil servants stopped returning my calls. No one could remember that any money had been allocated to us for Series 3, and the funding was withdrawn, and we would have gone out of business if it hadn't been for this man. It was Jeff Merchant. And I was introduced to Jeff Merchant by two civil servants from the Home Office earlier in the progression of our work. He was the only person that returned my phone calls when we were in this really difficult time. And I had made mistakes. I had not filled in forms. I had not done the kinds of things that we should have done to back up the funding that had been promised. So I explained the situation to Jeff, and he said, "This is too important for us to lose. We're going to find a way through this." And so he put me on the top management programme, which was something that he ran. And he said, if one person on this programme takes you under their wing, we'll save the programme. And he was absolutely right, because there are about 30 chief executives that go on that programme, and many of them are chief constables, and there were 2 chief constables on there. And also Jeff introduced me to John Barker, who is at one of our events here at Downing Street with Carol Enifer at the Home Office, who's also been a supporter of our work since 2004. And John Barker retired from the civil service and agreed to be the chair of our trustees. And between John and Jeff, they taught us about governance, and they taught us about strategy, and they taught us how to work with the civil service to make the civil service feel safe about the investments that we were making. So it was a very important piece of learning for us. The Chief Constable of South Yorkshire was the one person who saved us. He was on the top management programme, and he said, after coming into schools, spending 3 days on TMP, meeting people in London that had used the programme, I want this for all of our children in South Yorkshire. So he and the Chief Fire Officer of South Yorkshire funded the programme for primary school children for 3 years. 60,000 children in South Yorkshire have been using the Miss Dorothy programme, and we're now into the 4th year of the programme. And we have 86% of schools who choose to continue to use the programme after 4 years. So we feel that that is a huge step forward. Also, the presidents of the Association of Chief Police Officers, CFOA and the PFA have signed a strategic partnership agreement, which was another thing that John and Jeff taught me, that I needed to get people to sign pieces of paper if they were going to actually do things, and get them to commit on paper. So I got them to sign up to say they would try and get our programme for primary and secondary school children to every child in Britain by 2010. We moved on to the next Prime Minister, who I've learned they're good for photo shoots, so we brought them along to impress people. They're also good for parties. Downing Street is very good to impress sponsors with, to bring money in for what we're doing. But on a serious note, the ministers that you see here, I also started to say to the ministers, please don't come because you want your photograph taken. Please take time to meet me and understand what we do. And I spent an hour and a half with Ed Balls, with 4 chief constables and 4 chief firefighters. I spent time with Vernon Coker, with John Healy, who's the South Yorkshire MP, and all of these ministers, and including Jackie Smith, have introduced our programme into the schools where they work, and often with their own children. So that was an important thing for us. The other thing that was important, and the thing that both John and Jeff pointed out, is we had no evaluation. I'd like to ask you as civil servants, if you commission things, think about funding some money for evaluation, because if every penny you've got is going into trying to create workbooks for children, trying to make films for children, the thought spending £50,000 or £30,000, do I spend that on the children's books, or do I give it to an academic, which means then you'll give me more money? And it's a really difficult dilemma for third sector people. So Jeff and John again introduced me to some more of their management programmes and their leadership programmes, and I met Nagesh Reddy and Peter Hall from the Office of Fair Trading. They were on a diversity leadership programme, and they carried out an evaluation, which was very, very important, because it was the evidence that the Association of Chief Police Officers needed to invest in what we were doing. Can I just play the message from Ken Jones, please? He's recorded this to share with you why he supports our work.
Why have you backed the Kids Task Force?
I back the Kids Task Force because it matches precisely the mission of the police service, which is about standing between the weak and the strong, getting justice for people, and actually making people less vulnerable, particularly children and kids. I'm a parent, and I would like to think that that my emotions as a parent also play into this. And here's a ready-made programme that delivers everything we need to deliver for kids. The civil service in the UK is a great public institution. Every man and woman in it is there to serve the public. That's why they join. And many of them will finish up and are working in departments who have direct contact with our kids, be it education, be it the Home Office, health. And here's a programme really that will help them to get their jobs done. So that's why I think it's critical that they open their mind to this in the way that that we have as an agency, and to see there's an awful lot in there for them. Here's a fantastic tool for them to use to deliver what it is they're here to deliver, to make our society better, but in particular to help our kids become better citizens, to keep them safer, and to give them tools to keep themselves safe. It's there, ready-made for them. It's a no-brainer.
Another important person in our development, the former Chief Constable of Warwickshire, John Burbeck. obviously also looking at the evidence, and being brought in by ACPO, became the chairman of our board, and he works unpaid to develop our strategy and to work with the civil servants who are helping us. So what we realised is that it was very, very important to have the right strategic approach to what we were doing. It wasn't enough to be excited and passionate and innovative. We want the combination of them. The other thing that happened, I'm going to show you one more film, and then we're going to hand over to Paul Elliott to speak about the football world. But we created the blueprint, the national blueprint for rollout for the Cabinet Office, but what we didn't have was a blueprint for London. We had 40,000 children across London in the 8 most vulnerable boroughs use the programme. It had gone really well, but we needed a joined-up approach. And so I met also through the top management programme and one of the Cabinet Office courses, the Children's Services Director for Harrow, Paul Clark, who had been a civil servant in a former life and also taught me that I had to make civil servants feel safe. You know, I'm a journalist and I'm used to being passionate about things. So what he explained to me is that I actually had to show the civil servants who were involved actually what the risks were, but how had I managed them, and how could we work together with the civil service to manage the risks to make the impact greater for children. And so in Harrow, they created the blueprint for national rollout, which has in fact got us the support of the Mayor of London. So I'd just like to play the film with Boris Johnson and the story of Harrow, and just show you that this is what a Kids Task Force local picture looks like. You say to the children, these are the people in the community who are here to keep you safe. It's a really important visual picture for children to see. But it's also important that all of the schools in Harrow have been using the programme for the last 3 years, which is what persuaded the Mayor that there was evidence to roll this programme out across the whole of London. So we could play the film, please.
In April, at the launch of the Mayor's Fund for London, the Miss Dorothy Learning Scheme was formally recognised as one of the fundamental planks of his strategy. The fund was established by Boris Johnson to help some of the capital's most disadvantaged families. The idea is to persuade businesses to invest in schemes that'll help change people's lives. During the launch, the Mayor invited pupils from Weald Middle School in Harrow to talk about the benefits of using Miss Dorothy.
We have come today to discuss the beneficial effects that MissDorothy.com has on children. We feel that Miss Dorothy expresses dangers in the real world in a more child-friendly way so that kids can get the message.
The initial pilot will be centred around Shoreditch, but it's hoped it'll eventually roll out across the whole of London. So why did the Mayor choose the Miss Dorothy programme as one of the main parts of his fund?
Why are you supporting the Kids Task Force as part of your Mayor's Fund? Because it's vital to keep kids in school, and you keep them in school if they feel safe in school. So Miss Dorothy and the Kids Task Force and operations like that are absolutely vital to give kids the security to keep learning. Because if they don't keep learning, they won't make up the ground and they won't get the jobs they need.
The rollout throughout the pilot area to 108 primary and secondary schools of the Watch Over Me and Miss Dorothy programmes is part of the London Safe tranche of the Mayor's Fund and is led by the Kids Task Force and supported by the Metropolitan Police.
To be really effective, Miss Dorothy has to reach all young people in London, and it's our ambition that we support the Miss Dorothy to actually reach all young people. By only doing that, you actually make all young people feel safe, and you can start to drive down the risk of young people getting involved in crime.
Clearly, this is a huge achievement for the Kids Task Force. To be such an important part of a major mayoral policy proves it's succeeding in making kids safe.
Another film. One more film before we go to Paul Elliott, and that's about the football world. Because I think that I've asked Paul to be here today because I actually, again, met Paul because the children said that they wanted football to be involved. And I went to Charlton Athletic, who have a wonderful community programme. And I didn't really know anything about the football world at all. And so I asked Jeff Merchant, again, from the Cabinet Office, who's a volunteer for us, to be there at the meeting, because it's so amazing what credibility it lends you when you have someone in the Cabinet Office who is a volunteer and supports what you do. So we had a huge meeting at Charlton, and that's where I met Paul, and he became involved with us. And there's a very short film now, just to give you an idea of how football works with the safety of children. If we could just play that film, please.
Today the teacher is taking a back seat as the kids get a lesson from football in the community coaches from Watford FC. They're here as part of the MissDorothy.com learning
You're
programme.
going to come up, you can pick anything from there, okay, and put it on Bob.
Today's lesson is about the skeleton and where our bones go. It's all part of a health and fitness session that the coaches give to encourage the kids to learn about staying in shape. Working with the learning materials from the MissDorothy.com learning programme, the coaches bring their knowledge of football into play. It's all part of a partnership that's been running for 2 years between Watford FC and this school. After a bit of teaching in the classroom, it's out into the playground to get the kids moving. They're learning about stretches and why it's good to do sport. For the kids, it's a chance to have fun and learn in a very practical way. So what does their teacher think?
Great to have footballers in, because in our society, obviously children these days really do see a lot of football and they follow the lives of footballers. So to have actually footballers in is brilliant.
My hope is that all children in the generation that grow up with Miss Dorothy and that sort of programme, helping them feel safe and secure and knowing what they can do to look after themselves and their friends. That should be a 21st century aspiration for this country.
Yes, great! A game of cricket to encourage teamwork is next on the agenda. It may seem like fun, but it's also learning, and the kids clearly enjoy having the footballers' input.
So I'd like to ask Paul now to come and speak to you all and explain why he decided to become involved with the Kids Task Force. Paul.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Sharon. I was a professional footballer in a previous life, having played for various clubs in the UK and also in Europe. And I suppose when I came out of the game, I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to go. Didn't really want to be a manager, didn't really want to be a coach. Because having had sort of various friends who are sort of managers, they say the divorce rate is very, very high. And obviously the pressure and the level of expectation at the top level is considerable. So it does really have a damaging effect on your life. So one of the areas that I was sort of really involved in was in terms of racism. Because as a player, I was playing in this country, my career started in the 70s and the 80s, when there's many horrific problems in the stadiums with the BNP, the National Front, and there was a lot of big social issues in society. And football is not responsible for those issues. But what you used to have was those kind of extremists that used to use football as a platform, as a catalyst to promote their own social and extremist activities. So I suppose thereafter, having had many different experiences, I played my football in Scotland and also in Italy, and having sort of, had the usual sort of, monkey chanting, the abuse at various times, it went to actually banana throwing as well, which you all can imagine is absolutely horrific. So that was an area that sort of guided me where I wanted to go and really wanted to make a sustainable difference, just to maybe try and influence young people, because it was more or less that kind of minority. But education was obviously absolutely key, and obviously lobbying in the same way that Sharon had to do. So that took me down that road for a while, promoting, working with UEFA, FIFA, FIFPro, European Parliament on legislation, on education at grassroots level in schools, and basically using football as a vehicle, as a catalyst to deliver key social messages. And I think that is the word, deliver key social messages. That was the fundamental introduction to Sharon at Charlton Athletic Football Club, who are one of the clubs that I sit on as a trustee. Because as Sharon rightly says, they do extensive work in the community, using the power of football to deliver messages, as I said, in terms of health, in terms of fitness, social inclusion, community cohesion, citizenship, women and girls football. So you could see how the power of football could be used in a number of ways to deliver these messages. And that's where, for me, I saw the link. Because when we had this meeting, Jeff was there, Sharon was there, and automatically it struck a chord with me, because it was kind of outside my normal realm of thinking. And I believed there must be something that one could actually do about this. Because Sharon said to me the kids were very, very keen to engage and embrace football in her model, because she had the basic buy-in of CIFO and ACBO. And obviously they were very prominent. But obviously there was room there for football. And football in the sense that where professional footballers could act as role models, obviously to deliver key social messages. And as a father of two, I soon realised how the value of this model, the potential it had. I think it is reasonable to say that there was it was like a baby being born in its embryonic stage, but Sharon's baby was kind of getting self-sufficient, but wasn't completely independent. And that was a sort of journey that I engaged. And something said to me that, you know, I had to bring this to the attention of Gordon Taylor, who's the chief executive of the Professional Footballers Association. And I said, Gordon, listen, I've come across something that I think is absolutely fantastic. And he says, well, Paul, you know, what's the difference? I says, well, what it does is it gives children the skills to obviously to enable them to feel safe, to feel protected. So there's very much an educational content there. Because the reality is, all of us in here, we have that fundamental human right to work in an environment free from prejudice, discrimination, inequality, etc., etc. These children also had the fundamental human right to be made to feel safe, to be armed with skills, not just skills for life, I call it life skills. That was their fundamental privilege. And as parents, as I'm sure many of us are in this room, we had to do that. But obviously our children are not with us all the time. They have to go to school, they have to learn. They have to be engaged with other people to learn other skill sets. And I just felt, you know, that was very, very intrinsic. And I said, Gordon, also, what really perplexed me, and in many ways I was quite astounded, was the amount of different issues and subjects that it actually crossed over in social issues, in terms of bullying, in terms of health, in terms of violence, in terms of drugs, in terms of citizenship. And it kind of reminded me, I don't know, you know, it sounds a bit odd, it reminded me of that program many years ago, Grange Hill, when I was watching those Watch Over Me films. And it sort of ticks all those boxes in a kind of very natural, holistic way. And it was just a whole general fluidity in the manner of which it was done. And I remember actually saying to Sharon, was that the intention? And she says, no, it just naturally, it was a natural evolving process. And I think that was sort of credit where you actually start from there as the model, but obviously with the issues in society we know, the social issues and the amount of negative areas that kids are so susceptible to, obviously there had to be a duty of care to get a consistent, sustainable model to ensure their safety and the mechanism of applying the skills so they could obviously engage with those skills and be armed with those skills on their everyday journeys, in school, out of school, in their social life. And that's where I saw the real linking. And I have to say, when we had the meeting, Gordon Taylor, he's a dear man, he's a great man and a dear friend of mine, but he's a very unemotional man. And I think when Sharon done the presentation in Manchester, I mean, Gordon, I mean, be assured, I've got 6 or 7 minutes to speak. With Gordon, it could be about 67 minutes, because he can just talk and talk and talk and talk. But this time, he was just silent. And for me, I knew he was brought into this. And he actually said to me, but Paul, our professional footballers, we've got 4,000 professional footballers in this country. You know, over the last year, they've done about 18,000 visits. They've raised millions of pounds. You know, what else? You know, we're taking more on. I says, Gordon, this is an absolute must. And he said to me, Paul, after 1 hour with Sharon, and Sharon's ability, as I'm sure you've seen in the last 20 minutes, to engage and mesmerise, Gordon had bought in. And he said to me, Paul, we've had individual people over a period of time, you know, come to us about these different areas that needed to be plugged. But Sharon's model was just a wonderful, natural, cohesive way that joined it up. And obviously, you know, with the work that football clubs do in a community scheme, it was a real perfect fit. And Gordon recognised that that could actually make such a positive contribution to the wider CSR, corporate social responsibility. And he was absolutely spot on. And as they say, you know, thereafter, the rest is history. Because the PFA, you know, myself being a PFA trustee, we're absolutely delighted to be involved with this project. Me personally, I have a personal interest in there, just as a father, just as a human being. Because my modus operandi and my template since I've come out of football is wanting to make a difference. This ensures that I can make a sustainable difference in a way that touches me as a man, but more so as a father. Because my kids now have had access to this resource, and the difference in their behaviour, the difference in their confidence, their understanding, knowing what's right, knowing what's wrong, when they're armed with these skill sets, because it gives them an instinct and an understanding that it's very, very, very difficult to get. And where the model has evolved now, it's about a multi-agency partnership, ACPO, CIFO, the PFA, all working in tandem, because all the three different areas, they're all intrinsically linked to young people. And sport has a fabulous way of doing so much good. And I can assure you, many of you read about, the negative area of sport, about the 1% that's behaving inappropriately. But that's just 1%. There's another 99% that do so much good. And I have to say to you now, since Sharon's model has been embraced with the PFA, we've managed to put through further legislation with professional players. So of all the players in the country, they actually do 6 hours a week in the community, supporting work like what Sharon does. So you can imagine when you've got young people that see these footballers that play on Sky Sports, they see them on BBC One every week touching millions of kids, and they're going into schools from Celtic in the most northern part of England all the way down to Exeter in the south coast. You can imagine the impact that these professional players have on these young people, and the way they can inspire them, and the way they can actually influence their lives for good. That's exactly what they do. And Sharon's model is the perfect template that facilitates for that, because people believe in it. People believe in giving back. The game has been good to many, many footballers. They give a lot back. And Sharon's model is certainly consistent with that. And just to finish, I feel that one thing and I know, having spoken with Sharon, one thing that I felt that was fantastic, what she's built here is a structure. It's all about, for me, a sustainable legacy. In my opinion, there is no better legacy that's viable, sustainable, does what it said on the tin, than the Kids Task Force and MissDorothy.com. Your continued help and investment and support is obviously intrinsic to that. Thank you very much.
You can see why I enlisted him, can't you? He's good. I want to introduce now Duncan Taylor, who's been through, these are just a few pictures that I put in some of our events. And Duncan is a teacher, and these two ladies here are also teachers. And the thing that has been absolutely fundamental to the development of our programme and the sustained approach to the programme has been the involvement of teachers, not consultants, but teachers who are in the classroom. Teachers who know what is happening on a day-to-day basis with children. And here is Duncan, also at the party. And before, I met Duncan in 2003 when I was researching across the country to make Watch Over Me 1. And I was absolutely terrified. I had no idea what I was doing. I knew that I needed to talk to children. I knew I needed to get lesson plans written that were exciting and innovative and different. And I was really inspired when I met Duncan and his engagement that he had with the young people. I'm going to embarrass him now and show a very quick clip of Duncan in 2003 when I interviewed him. Could I just play the clip of Duncan Taylor, please, if you've got that, Phil?
Text-based. And a lot of the kids who are confronted with the kinds of issues which this explores are not the students who most readily take to text-based material.
A very brief look at Duncan. Would you like to come on the stage? The new younger version of Duncan Taylor, please, head teacher from Whitby. Actually, I should have said he is seconded to us for 2 years, which is very exciting.
Yeah, that was an enlightening experience. So what have you seen this morning? 2 Prime Ministers. And I might get this wrong because I've been trying to do it as we went along. 2 Prime Ministers, 3 Home Secretaries, countless senior civil servants, ACPO, CIFO, Professional Footballers Association, international footballer who even managed to mention my team, Exeter City. So thanks for that, Paul. And me. Why me? Yeah, I'm a head teacher. I'm currently a deputy head teacher, but I'm not standing here this morning as a head teacher because, quite frankly, when I came in this morning, I thought, right, Duncan, be professional, do it right, keep the jacket on, look the part. Actually, having watched that, I think there's a real value in taking the jacket off and rolling the sleeves up, because if I take you back to Sharon's story at the start, Sharon talked about her personal background as a child and what she lived through. Well, I'll do the really non-PC bit for a head teacher if you want. The most important piece of legislation in any school, the most important target in any school, is not the 5A to C grades that you're going to get at GCSE for your kids. And people might not like me saying that, but the bottom line is the second line of the ECM agenda is more important. And that second line says, stay safe. You see, you can hit little Johnny with a big stick as long as you like and as hard as you like, and you can maybe force the grade C at English out of him. But he'll not enjoy it, he'll not engage with it, and he won't get anything out of education. If you construct a system that actually gives him enjoyment and engagement and makes him feel safe, if it's within his capabilities, he'll still get you that grade C at English. That's why I think the ECM agenda is so important. And these materials buy absolutely into that ECM agenda. That little clip that Sharon showed, I still believe holds true. That was 6 years ago, and I don't really recognise myself on that clip. And, a cynic would say an awful lot more grey hairs and an awful lot less hair. And I would say that's what comes of working with Sharon and the Kids Task Force. But what I was getting at in that clip was that actually, the kids who are the most vulnerable are quite often the kids who don't attach themselves to text-based material. I came out of education and was seconded to the Kids Task Force for 2 years, and thanks to the DCSF for that and ACPO. And in my last few months of teaching, as a teacher, as a classroom teacher, not a head teacher or a deputy head, but as a classroom teacher, I taught a citizenship lesson in which I had a 14-year-old girl who had a reading age of 6.6. How the hell is she supposed to access written material? Where's her engagement with the issues that confront her? Trying to do sex education with that child was absolutely impossible because there was no material that wasn't written. She didn't understand a damn thing. It was a terrifying experience. These materials give access to kids like that. They take the most important conversation that kids have and they move it from one place to another. You see, I spent 10 years living in complete ignorance as a teacher, thinking that actually the kids were in my lesson and enjoying themselves because I was so good at what I did. It took me 10 years to realise that actually they enjoyed being there because that's where their mates were. The most important conversation that a kid has, as far as the kid is concerned, is the one they have in the corridor. The great strength of these materials is it takes that conversation off the corridor and moves it into the classroom. And it gives you the opportunity to help the child. It gives you the opportunity to try and direct the child's thinking. It's not rocket science, isn't any of this. The first time we ever used these materials in my school, and I wrote all the lesson plans for these, and I make no claim to anybody that those lesson plans are the way to teach Watch Over Me. They're a way to teach Watch Over Me. And anybody in this audience who's been a teacher, is a teacher, knows teachers, as soon as you open the pack and look at the lesson plans, the first thing you're going to say is, well, why the hell did he do it like that? My answer would be, I have no idea. And if you've got a better way of doing it, you do it your way. And if it works, ring me and tell me, and I'll nick it and put it in the next set of lesson plans. Because there is no set way of teaching with these materials. They're about engagement. They're about getting kids to speak. And by talking with kids and by directing kids, you can get them to be critically aware of their environment, critically aware of the social issues that surround them, and you can help them to come to the right decisions for themselves. Because you can't tell them what to do. And that's not what the aim is here. First time we ever used these materials in school, I taught a lesson with a member of staff who was so concerned about actually using different materials for once, and it wasn't these materials, it could have been any materials, it was different. So we combined the lesson. We put two groups together and we taught with these materials. This is the first time we'd ever used them in school. At the end of that lesson, which included a scene where a lad holds a knife up in front of his face, as the kids filed out, we had a child stop and say, "Sir, can I have a word with you in private?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, actually, sir, would it be okay if I speak to Miss Ryle?" I said, "Yeah, of course it would. And do you want me to go?" "Yeah, would you mind, sir?" And I went out of the room. And what that kid disclosed to my colleague was that she'd been self-harming for the previous year. Now, that's the power of the material. It gets kids to think about where they are in life. It gets kids to respond to social issues. That child went through the child protection line of the school and was helped with the issue of self-harming. And I could cite you hundreds of those cases. I will give you another one, a kid you're going to see in a minute, who this year, we were very, very fortunate, as you can see, to go to Downing Street. And I took a girl with us from my school to Downing Street who has a history within her family of domestic violence. Not only does she have a history of domestic violence within her family, but last year her brother committed suicide. So her background is one of huge upset. Beyond that, she had never been outside Whitby. She'd never been on a train. She'd never been away from home for a night. She'd never stayed in a hotel, all of which she did for the first time when she came down here. Needless to say, she'd never been to London. She became a bit of a role model in our school because she started to talk and open up and engage with the issues that she'd been through on domestic violence and suicide and bereavement. If I could bring her on this stage now, she would tell you that the reason that she was able to engage with those issues which made a massive difference to her was because a member of staff, having taught with the Watch Over Me materials, took half an hour to sit down after the lesson and talk to that kid when that kid wanted to talk about her personal experiences. She puts down her change to Watch Over Me. The upside that goes beyond that for education is that a kid whose attendance at school was falling, a kid whose attitude to school was diminishing, a kid who academically we would have said was going to not reach her potential and fail at her GCSEs, is now taking 9 GCSEs, all of which she is graded at A star to C for, and all of which she will get. Her attitude swung round because of the engagement that's been encouraged by these materials. And I can't really give you a more powerful testament than that. Its greatest strength, as I say, is that it moves the conversations into a place where we can impact on them as teachers. My current position is that I'm seconded to the national rollout team for the Prevent strategy, seconded to the Kids Task Force, and I'm on this humongous road trip all over the country with other colleagues. And as part of the Prevent strategy, through the backing and the funding of the DCSF, Watch Over Me materials have been made freely available to all secondary schools in England and Wales. And we're now training teachers, local authorities, police service, third sector charity to use these materials to the benefit of kids. And that's the absolutely crucial bit, because what you've seen this morning is prime ministers and senior civil servants and everything else. If these materials only stay on their desks, if these materials are only known about by people like you, that's not good enough. They have to reach the classroom. And that's what this rollout has allowed us to do. As part of a really significant contest strategy, as part of the Prevent strategy, Watch Over Me goes into the schools. And one or two people who I would really like to thank as part of that, Hannah Sheehan, Hermione Goff and Mark Collins from the DCSF have been huge supporters and backers of this. They keep us on track when we are trying to do this job and get this job right. And this is going to last for at least another year. And personally, I would like to thank them because I am a qualified head teacher. Theoretically, I suppose, should be sat at home with copies of the TES applying for heads jobs. There are some going in my county, 2 of which my local authority have rung me up about and asked me whether I'm interested. The answer at the moment is, no, I'm not, because what I'm doing is this, and what I'm committed to is making sure these Watch Over Me materials reach the chalk face and are used by teachers. And to do that, we have to be supported by you guys. So thanks very much for your support, and long may it continue. Thanks.
I'd just like to end by thanking you all for coming here. I hope that you're now going to be friends of the Kids Task Force and be letting us know when we should be applying for things and what's happening. And I'd like to thank both Duncan and Paul for giving up their time to be with us today. Thank you very much.